Chapter 26. Turn the Other Bleak. It's a Sunday night, arguably the most depressing time of the week, when I realize that Adam is never going to call. It's been months since we talked, and he's obviously either completely psychotic, a pathological liar, or both. But since I have a column due, I'm desperately trying to take all the anxiety and burgeoning depression I feel over being rejected by Adam and convert it into work obsession. I'd heard people in meetings talk about, quote, trading one addiction for another. So as soon as a thought about Adam pops up, I force myself to write about the truth or dare night. This seems oddly appropriate since it's when he and I first bonded. Before I know it, I've written the beginning. The bar for wild behavior had already been raised higher than it should have been, I write. Yet somewhere between making out with a girl and having the nether region of a guy I just met shoved in my face repeatedly, I realized that it was too late to turn back now. I finished writing the column, describing my impromptu dance and the horror I felt when I realized someone was watching it, ending with a line about how much truth or dare had changed since I was a kid. As soon as I finished the piece, I realized that what I need to do to feel better is to call Adam and find out what the hell happened. There's probably a really good explanation for why he hasn't called, I think. Maybe he lost my number or has been so crazed with his show premiering that he hasn't had a free moment to get in touch, but would be absolutely thrilled to hear my voice. As I contemplate this, I stare at the TV screen, half watching the real-world castmates throw plates at each other. Then a commercial comes on, and I suddenly see Adam in a three-piece suit and talking on a cell phone as he walks down the street. He looks so good that I can't believe I ever doubted his attractiveness. The agency, that guy who seems to narrate every single commercial in the world blathers, promises to be the hottest show of the season. I'm so convinced that seeing his commercial is a sign I should call him that I pick up the phone almost subconsciously, and I'm horribly disappointed when I get his voicemail. This isn't what I'd imagined happening when I fantasized about calling him, but I improvise, leaving a message that I diligently try to make sound both sweet and mellow. And I wait. Then, realizing I'm on the verge of driving myself mad, I call Stephanie and ask if she wants to go on a walk. 5 days of intense cuticle picking later, I wail to Stephanie on the phone. He didn't call me back. A-hole, Stephanie says, sighing. Who the hell doesn't return a call after 5 days and 3 hours? Well, you want the truth? She says. You, me, all of us at one time or another. But that's only when we don't want to actually talk to the person, I wail. Stephanie lets that sink in for a bit and then says, I know, it hurts. During our walk, not to mention the last 5 conversations we've had about this, Steph has been the perfect sport, trotting out and analyzing every last possible reason. Maybe Adam is intimidated by me now, or was just completely immature and was worried he'd end up fodder for a future column. Or his possessive co-star was in love with him and had broken into his phone to delete all his messages. I don't blame Steph for feeling exhausted by the process of coming up with more excuses for him, but accepting that he simply doesn't want to talk to me causes me to want to curl into a small ball of messy tears and torn cuticles. In rehab, I learned about how dangerous it can be for alcoholics and addicts to have expectations, because we tend to not be able to handle the disappointment of having them not met. Expectations, Tommy had told us, were, quote, resentments under construction. But knowing that doesn't get me out of my doldrums. The day I spent with Adam was the first time in my life I felt like I knew what people meant when they talked about finding the one. But they usually got years or at least months or weeks with the person. Why the hell did my discovery have to be so ephemeral? Depression is something you're bound to experience, Tommy would say. And it would stun me how casually he'd mention the word depression, like he was talking about having the flu, and not something completely overwhelming and debilitating that made life seem unlivable. It too will pass, he'd always add, sounding like someone who couldn't ever possibly have lived through a depression. After 3 solid days of not showering, cleaning, eating, answering the phone, or really doing anything beyond dumping cat food into dishes and coating my pajamas in cigarette smoke, I decide it's time to check voicemail. My mom, Stephanie, the CSI actor who tried to put his hands down my pants in New York, Daniel, Stephanie again, and what seems like about 1,000 hangups. Even though I already know that none of the messages would be from Adam, it doesn't stop me from crying when I get to the last one and it's not him. When I hear who it is, however, I cry even harder. Amelia, says a voice that's at once both immediately familiar and hard to place. What can I say? You're the cat's meow, the toast of the town, the bee's knees. Who do I know who would use those expressions? And then it hits me. I guess part of me is glad to see that you actually remembered what happened between us, Chris says, his voice cracking slightly. But what did you think? That I wouldn't see it? Or did you just not care? I sit there frozen as he does exactly what I hope he won't and starts reading from my column. It was only after an impromptu reunion several weeks after the fact that I realized I'd gotten the basic elements of the menage altogether wrong, he reads. Most girls had them with their hottest female friend and, say, a red hot chili pepper. I'd had mine with a couple of guys who'd probably have an easier time working their way around the Starship Galaxy than they would a woman's body. Chris clears his throat. Maybe I wouldn't care if you hadn't treated me like a leper ever since, he says. But Jesus, think of someone besides yourself for once. That throws me into yet another crying jag. Though much like someone covered in tattoos might have a difficult time identifying how many they actually had, I decide I needn't bother calling them crying jags anymore, but just consider the entire day one long, extended, singular crying jag. Afterward, I sit and smoke, lighting each new one from the butt of the one before. I contemplate calling Stephanie to ask her if it's possible that I'm the worst person in existence, but settle instead for falling asleep on the couch when I'm too exhausted to cry anymore. Sometime later, I wake up to the sound of someone banging on my front door. I stumble to it, groggy to the point that I almost feel hungover. Stephanie stands there, a bag of Trader Joe's sweet, savory, and tart Trek mix in her hand, and a stocky Russian woman behind her. Don't say a word, she says, gesturing for the woman to go inside. I told Svetlana I had an emergency for her. Handing me the bag of trail mix, she adds, I wanted to bring you something healthy to eat, but knew I'd have to start you on something you wouldn't reject outright. Thank you, I croak gratefully as she opens my living room window and starts dumping overflowing ashtrays into the trash. You're welcome, she says. Now, will you please stop plathing it over this guy so Svetlana can clean your apartment?